In this video, we will see how Halloween is connected with Samhain, an ancient Celtic celebration to welcome the harvest at the end of summer. We will see the history of Samhain and its traditions, some of which are still alive today thanks to the Halloween celebration. Are you ready? Let's get into it. The Celtic calendar is frequently referred to as a wheel, a clear allusion to the sun. This wheel was linked to the harp of the Dagda, likening the recurring seasons as a repeating story. Whereas spring and summer were the domain of innocence, youth, love, and virility, the dark half of the year was given to mysteries, wisdom, aging, and death. If you don't know who is Dagda, don't worry. You will find a video about him in the description below. You will also see in that video what happened when they stole his magic harp. Samhain was the most widely celebrated of the ancient Celtic festivals. It was a celebration of the harvest, of the closing of the year, and the beginning of the new year. Agriculturally, it was the time when the last fruits of the harvest were collected and stored, and the livestock were culled and quartered for the winter ahead. The dark time of the year had many magical and mythical associations as well. Samhain was also the time when the gates of the otherworld were thrown open, allowing the spirits of the ancestors to mingle with the living. It was at this time that the fabled wild hunt, a procession of animals, fairies, and spirits, was most often said to occur. The Samhain festival marked the transition between two very different seasons. The growth season was at an end, with the majority of crops long harvested. The time for festivals and tribal gatherings was coming to an end, and warfare and trade would be largely suspended until warmer weather returned. This was a last opportunity for merrymaking and celebration before a long winter confinement. Samhain was celebrated at the cusp of the seasons, marking the end of the light and the beginning of the dark of the year. In mythical terms, the youthful aspect of the goddess sovereignty gave way to the withered hag of winter, and the fruits and flowers of the warm season were replaced with the barren cold of winter. It was marked with a great feast at which the High King was symbolically mated with the goddess of sovereignty, a celebration that marked the Samhain night coupling of the Morrigan and the Dagda on the eve of the Battle of Magtuiriad. Indeed, the Samhain was a favorite time for tribal assemblies, during which all of a people would gather together for feasting, games, and amusements, and also to settle debts and disputes. In ancient times, great offerings would have been made at lakes, shafts, and the entrances to the earthen mounds, as the denizens of the otherworld would be particularly receptive. Horse races and other feats of strength were not uncommon at this time, a tradition going back to the earliest days of the Celtic peoples. Samhain was considered a time of great change. It was also a time of great transparency between the world of man and the otherworld. Samhain was a traditional time for divination and prophecy, an auspicious time for sacrifice. The transformation of the world brought about other transformations, and it was at this time one could enter the otherworld. Celtic myth tales involving otherworld magic often take place during Samhain, and now is when otherworld denizens make benevolent journeys or even warfare against the living. Samhain was the preferred day for beginning an adventure or setting out on a quest, especially a divine one. Many important events in Celtic mythology take place or begin at the time of Samhain. For example, it is at Samhain that Emick seeks to recognize his lover Caer in her swan form. If you don't know who is Emick, again, don't worry. You will find a short video about him in the description below. Before we move on, if you like the video, give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to the channel for more mythology and folklore videos. A common urban legend claims that the Samhain celebration was in honor of a ghastly god of death by the same name. Although a few minor Celtic gods have similar names, none has any connection to the Samhain festivals. Samhain was celebrated all over Ireland and Great Britain with the lighting of sacred bonfires. As in similar rituals in the north, the Samhain fires were the first fires of the season. The bonfires themselves were inaugurated by the Druids. The bonfires were not the only fire rituals associated with Samhain. A popular ritual called Lading the Witches involved a solemn candlelit procession, the purpose of which was the discovery of dark magic. If a candle flickered or died out during the procession, it meant that the person carrying it was a certain victim of witches, and special precautions would be taken to protect him or her. Other precautions would be taken as well. As the Tuatha De Danann were well known to roam the countryside, it was customary to leave gifts of milk and bread for them, not just on Samhain, but on the other festival days as well. This customary offering was sometimes referred to as the fairy tax, honoring the ancient agreement between the Milesian Celts and the denizens of the otherworld. Even after the demise of the pagan Celtic culture, Samhain remained a popular holiday, and in early Ireland it was the most important of the four great festivals. There is a common theory that floats about that the institution of Halloween by the Catholic Church was intentionally begun as an answer to the reluctance of the people to give up pagan revelries or the remembrance of the dead. Although there was a definite connection with death and passages, there isn't a lot of evidence that Samhain was held to honor the dead. Most such claims come much too late to be of any use, and the idea is never mentioned in the surviving mythological tales. It is a fair assumption, however, that in this traditional time of tribal gathering, some commemoration would have been made on behalf of the ancestors. It is known that it was sometimes customary to light torches at the entrances of the ancient tombs to make clearer the passage from the otherworld. From the earliest days of the Church, it was customary to observe a day in memorial to the saints. Later, this expanded to include all of the dead. The saints of the Church were celebrated on November 1st with a solemn mass and singing. As it was already customary to honor one's ancestors during the Samhain period, it was only natural that the Church's own observances followed suit. It became customary to visit cemeteries on this day, to sweep and clean the graves, and echoing the older custom, lights were lit outside of homes and in cemeteries. Water and other provisions would be left out, and the doors left unlocked. The ancient tombs were not neglected either. The old custom of walking in clockwise procession 3 times about the ancient monuments carried well into medieval times. The November celebrations were eventually worn away as the popularity of the All Saints Festival increased. Within a few hundred years, the commemoration of the dead also moved from an earlier date to coincide with the November observation, so that eventually the two would be held back to back. In any case, the Christian observations were quite unlike their pagan predecessor, and by the medieval period, the feasts became solemn reminders of mortality and the grisly fates awaiting the sinner. In medieval times, as during other feast days, it became customary to spend Samhain night going door to door collecting food and other offerings for the poor, often in exchange for prayers said for the homeowner. However, the Samhain ritual often involved a costumed masquerade, some say in imitation of the fairy procession. If a homeowner gave generously to these masked visitors, the visitors would make a solemn procession around the kitchen fire, a tradition that clearly echoes the ancient Samhain rituals. Were the hosts less than generous, they would be cursed in a similar manner. Neo-pagans, especially Wiccans, have embraced Samhain as their most sacred holiday, an adoption based on Samhain's importance as a celebration of endings and beginnings. The modern pagan take of Samhain is more of a composite holiday, often mingling traditions of the ancient Celts with later European practices. Samhain is generally viewed by modern pagans as a time for reflection and meditation, and a time to commune with the spirits of dead loved ones, honor one's ancestors, and prepare for prosperity or good fortune in the coming year. A typical Wiccan or neo-pagan celebration of Samhain may include memorials for the departed, visits to cemeteries, and rituals to honor ancestors. Traditional harvest goods such as pumpkins, apples, and mead are often featured. I hope you liked the video. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Trick or treat.